this is part 2 about writing functions in PHP, and I'm going to look at how you might write a function to save your repeating code when it comes to doing a select box. If you look at these two examples here, we've got two selects, one to choose a type of product, let's say, and one to choose a category, and they're really similar, and you end up writing this sort of code all the time, don't you? So let's look at the differences between them, because that's one of the key things to writing a function in the first place, is noticing first of all you've got code repetition, and then noticing what the differences are in that code repetition, because that'll help you figure out maybe what your parameters to the function are going to be, so that the function can behave differently according to the parameters that it receives, the arguments that you give it. So if we look at these two examples, the differences are, well, the actual value that we use for the name of the select box. Remember, that's the thing that goes into the request stream. So type ID in the first one, if I choose book, then it'll put in the URL or into the post type ID equals whatever the value is. Okay, so it makes sense to name it after whatever the value is that you're passing. So the name is different, type ID in that one, cat ID in that one. Obviously the values are different and the descriptors are different. Well, in the previous example, in part 1, we looked at how we could use an associative array to pass some information, and that might be a good way to do it. If I could put these values in an associative array, that would be one set of things I'd want to tell the function, and then the other thing I'd want to tell the function is the name that I'm going to use. And actually, conceivably, I can think of a third thing we might want to tell it if some of these are pre-chosen, because don't forget, if that was the one I wanted to be pre-chosen in my HTML, I could write selected equals selected in XHTML or HTML4. In HTML5, and in our house rules in this particular module for which I'm doing this screencast, if the name of the attribute is the same as the value of the attribute, you can reduce it so it just reads selected. So, we might want to say which of these is selected. That might be useful for some future work. So, how could I achieve that then? Well, let's look at the PHP code that we normally write to produce that. So it would look kind of like that in pseudocode. Let me just move those things so that they're not on the screen at the same time. It might look like that. I'll have some SQL that will be different according to what I'm displaying, and then I'll have some code that executes that SQL as a statement. Then I'm going to echo a select with the type ID in that instance or cat ID in that instance. I'm then going to iterate over the result set, and as I iterate around, I'm going to echo out option value equals the type ID value and the type description value. Or in this case, I'm going to echo out the cat ID and the description. So how can I put that into a function? Well, let's look at the real code for that first of all. Two ways you might do it, depends on how you're being taught, which module you're following, but you might use MySQL query with the connection and the SQL, store it into a result set, and then iterate over that result set saying row equals fetching each row in turn as an associative array, and then echoing out row and whatever the value is. If you're using PDO, you might get a record set by doing a query, calling the query method of that database object, passing in the SQL, and then iterating around using fetch object into a variable called row, and then we can echo row minus greater than cat ID as though that were a property or attribute of what is this object, because we've used fetch object. And so whichever way you use, it's the same kind of thing that we're doing. So how could I convert that into a function? Well, my first thought was maybe I could execute the record set, do the query, and then pass in the result set into my function, and the function could then iterate over a result set like that or a result set like that. The only problem is that wouldn't work if I use fetch a sock, because when I use fetch a sock I have to actually know the names of the keys or the indexes, so it would be a bit messy if I then started to pass the names of the fields that I wanted to display, although that's possible. I suppose I could change it from fetch a sock to fetch array, is it, and then what that does is a numeric array, and then I can always display row 0 and row 1, you know. But that starts to be a bit messy, and if in part 1 I said that the function shouldn't really know about the outside world, suddenly we're making our function know quite a lot about the outside world. It will only work if we've got the database connection, and it'll break otherwise. So it would be much better if we could just fetch all the data back at once as an associative array and just pass that in, because then we could even just pass in an associative array. We don't even need to make it fetch the data from a database, which occasionally you want to do. So in order to fetch back the entire record set as an associative array, rather than using a while loop and fetching one row at a time like we've done in both of these cases, we could use, where have I put it, this sort of approach, again depending on whether you're using MySQLi or whether you're using PDO. If you're using MySQLi, you can just go MySQLi underscore fetch underscore all and tell it that you want an associative array using that manifest constant. If you're using PDO, you do fetch all. Obviously, you've executed the query first in both of those cases, but you use fetch all, and again use PDO : fetch a sock using that manifest constant, and in both cases results then is an associative array. Okay, so let's imagine then we've got an associative array. Let's think how we're going to produce that kind of code. So let me take one of those as an example, go over to my web functions. I'll just pop that above that bit so I'll just use it for reference, and then I'll start to write my function. These are the functions that we wrote in part 1. Okay, so function, let's call it make select. And what are we going to pass to it? Well, we're going to pass the name, because that's the thing that's one of the things that varies in my 2 examples, and then we're going to pass the options. Let's call it options, that seems a good word, options. Brace, close brace. So what am I going to do first of all? Well, I'm going to make up, because we don't want this to do any echoing, so I want to make up a string that I'm going to return from inside this function. So I'm going to make up a variable called output, because I can't think of anything else, and I'm going to set that equal to, in double quotes, what I see above, select name equals, in quotes, something or other. Put it onto a new line. So what's the name going to be? Well, it's going to be the variable that was passed that I helpfully called name. Okay, so now what I'm going to do, well, now I'm going to iterate over the array. I am then going to add to output and an option for each element in the array. Okay, so for each really useful construct, my array is called options. Actually, while I'm on, I should type hint, shouldn't I, that has to be an array, so that if anyone tries to pass something that's not an array, it will give them an error. And it's an associative array, so we'll call it, let's call it value and description. So we're going to add to output an option. So $output dot equals option. All we're doing is following kind of pattern from up above here. Option value equals something or other, greater than, that's the end option. In there is going to be the description, and in there is going to be the value. And then we want to finish off by adding the end select that I started there. And actually, if I think about it, I probably want to tab those in, following the same pattern that I did before, and put each one of those on a new line. So then here, option dot equals the end select. Put that on a new line so it returns a nice string, and then I'm just going to return. Oh, I called it option, I should have called it output. I hope you're all screaming out there in video land about that mistake. Output. And I'll make some vertical space there so that I'm sort of separating that block of functionality from this line, so I don't lose sight of the fact that that function is going to return something. So let's test that. That's my menu, I'll leave that there. I've already required once web functions, so let's make up an array of, and I'll call it select options equals array. So this is the advantage of this approach, is I actually don't need to use the database at all, but I could, of course, had that code that I described up there, you know, select equals whatever MySQLi query or DB query, and then one or other of those, and then results would be the thing that I would pass into my nice function instead of this select options which I'm about to create. I hope that sort of makes sense to you. If it doesn't make sense, you probably shouldn't be watching this video about writing functions, but you can always play this bit again if that bit I've skipped over you actually didn't quite understand. So in this array, what I'm going to put, select, let's use one of those examples that I'd got here. What was it? Choose a type. I'll link those, so save me having to think, because thinking, it would appear, is not my strong point today. So I've got the first value is going to be 0, 1. And it's going to be the word book. Actually, my first one is a blank, isn't it? So I might as well do that as well. So a blank, and that equals choose a type. I'm actually mixing up, aren't I, between double and single quotes, and I really shouldn't do that. It's best to be consistent. Use double quotes if you're embedding a variable, but otherwise it's probably easier just to stick to one thing, which is single quotes, I guess. 0, 2. There are some people that suggest using single quotes is quicker than using double quotes because you don't have to interpolate, but equally, in other words, the processor, the PHP preprocessor, doesn't have to bother looking inside the string, but equally I've read that that's rubbish and it makes virtually no measurable difference at all. Magazine, and the final one is 0, 4, toy. So that's my select options, and now I can just echo, I'm going to call it make select, and I want to pass in the name of type ID and it's prompting me, look, that it's an array that I need to pass select options. Okay, so let me just delete this code. And let's try my demo again. refresh, and suddenly I've got choose a type. Actually, I've got choose a type twice. What have I screwed up? Web functions. It's probably because I put that code in, look, for me to follow as a model, and then I forgot to delete it. So let me just do that, and then I've only got one. So choose type, and that's my set of choices. And let's view the source to see if it looks all right. And sure enough, look, it's produced some code exactly like I would want. So fairly straightforward. There's only one little tiny thing, which is that if you're using one of these methods, then obviously the data it fetches back is kind of like, where is it? It's sort of like that, but it doesn't have that first element in. So if you want to insert a blank element, you're going to have to figure out how to insert something at the start of an array. Okay, if you probably, there's this great thing, I don't know if you've heard about it, it's called Google. PHP insert element at start of associative array, and it'll probably tell you how to do it. Add items to the beginning of an associative array. So the question's all already been answered. So you can use array merge. I'm sure there's another way. Anyway, I'm not going to spoil the surprise. You look it up yourself. Yeah, so simple and straightforward, and yet suddenly, instead of having to constantly repeat yourself like that, we've now got a nice function that will do it again and again and again for us. So when you're writing code, try and think of times when you're doing repetition, and if you find yourself writing the same lot of code again and again and again, maybe it's time to think of a different way of doing it. Okay, well, a small addendum, a small addition, a small change. As I was saying, that you get your connection, you do some SQL, then you could query it using MySQLi, or you might query it using PDO. In either way, with MySQLi or with PDO, you'll end up with results, which is an associative array. Now, I suggested that what you could do is then pass that straight away to your make select function. But in actual fact, that's not quite true, because MySQLi and PDO don't return a straightforward associative array. In actual fact, if we do that and look at results by using, I actually wrote a little tiny function to do it that just printed a pre-format tag and then uses print R to print it out. Well, what we find is that the array returned looks like that. In other words, it's an associative array here, but it's contained inside a numeric array, where in actual fact all we want is this data here, 1 and book and 2 and CD in an associative array. So there's a nice function that will do that for us, and that function is this. It's a function called array column, and I'll look into that in more detail in a moment. If we run array column on it, then this array is transformed into this array, which is exactly what we want. Okay, so this is our code. And as I say, you've either done MySQLi, or you've done PDO, or possibly some other form of connection altogether. But in either case, what you then need to do is transform these results into a flat array. So using array column, we pass in the original array that we've got, which is that more complex associative array, and then we tell it which field we want, and comma, the second argument can be whatever the key for that is. If we don't pass in that, it'll actually return a numeric array with that as the only value, with each value as part of a numeric array, in other words, numbered 0, 1, 2, 3, etc. But if we pass in a second argument, then that becomes the key in an associative array with that as the data. So if you're using MySQLi, you do that. If you're using PDO, you do exactly the same. And then you then pass results to your function, echo make select, with whatever the name of the select element might be. In this case, I guess it would be type ID, because that would be the thing that's sent as part of our form. Then the array, which in this case, in my example, I've just called results. Okay, hope that was helpful. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.